Finally, a chance to try out my new joystick. Wait, something doesn't feel right here. It's a right-handed joystick, but I'm left-handed. Alright then, FreeSpace right-handed. Let's do this. Get off my lawn! In 1992, Learner Research created Car and Driver, a racing game with a car magazine name. It was published by Electronic Arts back when they weren't terrible. Shortly afterwards, the developer merged with Blue Sky Productions to form Looking Glass Studios, who crafted some of the best titles ever. Shame I don't like any of them. Mike Kulas and Matt Toshlog, sorry Matt, were two of the programmers involved in Car and Driver, and in 1993 they came together to form Parallax Software. They spent the next 7 months developing a game called Inferno to be released by Apogee, but were dropped due to the lengthy development time. Interplay showed interest in the prototype and offered to publish the full version. Thus Descent was born. I probably should have reviewed that before. Why didn't I review that beat? Descent was a hallmark title for the 6 Degrees of Freedom shooter genre, and the first to feature entirely 3D graphics. These technical marvels and a fun campaign netted sales of over 1 million copies, despite it being a motion sickness-inducing maze simulator. Descent 2 followed, and Parallax grew, during which Toshlog and 3 other designers opened a second office in Ann Arbor, proving that moving away from Champaign is moving away from success. As a result of the separation, the company split in two, with Kulas renaming Parallax to Volition, and Toshlog creating Outrage. Volition's first goal was a lofty one. They wanted to make an improved version of the Lucasarts space sims. Since Star Wars TIE Fighter is and always will be perfect, their task was impossible, obviously. The wordy Descent FreeSpace The Great War, or Conflict FreeSpace The Great War, was the result of their attempts. The team had to append Descent to the game's title in order to avoid trademark issues, with a disk compress utility from Mygenix Corporation that was also called FreeSpace. It's very easy to confuse the two, I know. For the sake of brevity and because it has nothing to do with Descent's story, we're calling it FreeSpace from here on in. While lacking the vertical or horizontal strafing control of Descent, FreeSpace opted to eschew the physics of LucasArts flight sims and operate in 0G. This can make for a bit of a bumpy ride if you're used to gravity and air resistance in your games, as evidenced by the precarious lurching of my craft in these initial clips. A texture-mapped game from 1998 operating at a 640 by 480 resolution looks decidedly dated, but there are ways and means to go about improving that. If you download N-Glide from Zeus Software, you can trick FreeSpace into thinking you have a 3DFX Voodoo graphics card. This bumps up the resolution somewhat, and the 3D acceleration is silky smooth, provided you can get it to work. But wait, there's more! In 2002, Volition released the source code to FreeSpace 2, and modders got to work repurposing it, crafting an open source version of its engine and also recreating FreeSpace, but upgraded with all the bells and whistles of its sequel. A retail or digital copy of FreeSpace 2 is still required to use it, but the results speak for themselves. Ooh, pretty. It's the same level, but with FreeSpace open, complete with higher resolution and better graphics. Pretty good, yeah? Well, we can still do one better than that. High-definition recreations of the original models and better effects and backdrops have been made by various members of the community over the years. These are released in packages called Media VPs. So finally, here's the FreeSpace port with Media VPs installed. It's a stunning improvement on the original, especially when you switch between the two in a jarring and irritating fashion like I'm doing now. The version you want to play is purely a matter of taste, as the new models and backdrops might not be to everyone's liking. If you want to tackle the original, then I suggest making sure the executable runs as administrator so that the values set in the menu are persistent. The game might not run at all otherwise. If you want improved gameplay and graphics but have a potato for a computer, then FreeSpace Open is your weapon of choice. If you have all the bells and whistles of a modern gaming system, then get those Media VPs. Lastly, if you want an easy way of installing all the fancy upgrades, then I suggest downloading Gnosis. Knossos? Gnosis. a new front end and hub for FreeSpace open modding that contains hundreds of hours worth of standalone titles using the engine. I'll be playing the game with the standard 3D accelerated FreeSpace and the FreeSpace port. The VPs are well worth a look though, but as you'll soon see, I had a tough time with them on my poor warhorse of a machine. By 1998, cutscenes were really starting to look better, and while dated, the opening here sets the tone nicely. You're invited to create a pilot and enter a menu that borrows wholesale from Lucasarts. Look at the animated doors! Remind you of anything? From here you can choose your pilot, settings and controls, the campaign, craft information, and then finally enter the ready room to start or continue your current campaign. The most important thing to note is that this is a space simulator, just like TIE Fighter, and the key bindings in the controls section show you just how extensively the keyboard is used. I hope you were an octopus in a previous life. The game gives you the option to skip the training if you know what you're doing, which is nice. Unfortunately, while there are similarities between the control schemes, FreeSpace does differ from LucasArts significantly. So if you've never played it before, then it's back to boot camp. You may have strafed across a Death Star trench or single-handedly taken out fleets with a missile boat, but now it's time to learn how to move forward. Basic navigation, HUD and targeting are laid out in a fairly straightforward fashion, and after dogfighting with a few drones, you're off to fight for real this time. One thing you'll note is that there's just the HUD, no interior cockpit for you. I was surprised at how little this took me out of the game. Unfortunately for my cocky gung-ho nature, the training wasn't enough time to get adjusted to my new control scheme, but despite making a complete pig's ear of the first mission, I pulled through with minimal damage to anything other than my pride. In FreeSpace, you're not the chosen one or some ace hotshot. You're just another rookie fighter shot out into the vastness of space and one bad encounter away from being cannon fodder. I appreciated that greatly, as it meant they paired me up with a more seasoned pro who was kind enough to begrudgingly carry me through the mission on his proverbial back, much like everyone else does in the real world. You're thrown an immediate curveball by leading a team into an asteroid field. I guess the planned flight leader was sick that day. Unless you've completely forgotten the controls, it's easy enough to avoid being pulverized. Your sensors are compromised, but you can still follow the visual guidelines until they kick in. There's also a Vasudan ace pilot in the area to dispatch as a bonus goal, just like TIE Fighter. The bonus goals, I mean. There were no Vasudans in TIE Fighter that we know of. Assuming those visual guidelines show up. In the port version of the mission with the VPs installed, they didn't, and the fancy backdrop didn't help matters either. I retried this level multiple times, and no matter what I did, the damn Vasudans wouldn't show up on my radar. What was odd about this was that both the original and the FreeSpace port were fine, so I don't know if it's some kind of visual error or what. After returning home victorious, or not, you're given more training about refilling your craft, applying countermeasures, and commanding your wingman. The AI was less than convincing in this one.
Get out of there! Pilot. Get out of there! No!
Well, how does it feel to have ordered your first kill? Hope you enjoyed it because I want you to do it again.
Blast damage is a thing, as my poor craft found out in the next mission, attempting to intercept cargo containers and flying way too close to a freighter as it exploded, despite my wingman warning me. By now you'll know if the game is for you, as you should be rattling off key commands and swinging wildly through space, dogfighting your way into the heart of the enemy ranks, or cranking down the difficulty mode and forgetting all the key commands between playthroughs while getting in the way of your wingmen. Either's good. Aside from the pretty effects, improved sound and models, widescreen support and the backdrops, there's not much difference between the enhanced FreeSpace port and the original FreeSpace. Both ran extremely smoothly, and once you've got the hang of 0G, you'll feel a real sense of both power and camaraderie with your plucky wingmen, who aren't entirely useless after all. That was my kill, damn it! The lack of major difference in engine and flight mechanics is probably because there was only a year of development time between FreeSpace and its sequel, which doesn't quite Age of Empires the original, but it is significantly better. The brief briefings between missions are fully voiced and par for the course, though there are nice little graphical flourishes here and there. Sadly, your monotonous commanding officer is no Guy Sanair, but who is? It's a competent job and you're given detailed information on what you're supposed to be doing in a no-nonsense fashion, which is all you can ask for really, except for Guy Sanair. One of the cool features about FreeSpace is that you get transferred from ship to ship, and occasionally that results in hearing different briefing officers. As these missions unfold, you're swept into the main plot. A desperate game of intrigue between three warring factions, featuring unstable alliances facing off the terror of the unknown. With the progressing of missions comes the advancement of your own technology, with new ships and loadouts and armaments giving you a real sense of improvement as you capably perform your role. One level in particular stood out when I ordered all wings to attack an enemy that was besieging a beleaguered allied ship that entered our space during an escort mission. My wing complied without a second thought, but the second wing countermanded my orders, insisting that they stay with the convoy they had been ordered to escort. The chatter over intercom is reminiscent of the Wing Commander series, and gives personality to the AI that you're flying with, immersing you further in the game's world. While you don't know any of your wingmen by name, you're all in this together and can feel their panic when things start to go wrong. Another thing that differs from some previous titles in the genre is that the goals you feel don't necessarily mean the end of the campaign. You're awarded medals for exceptional performance, but also given a good talking to if certain tasks aren't performed. In the debriefing, you're able to get hints as to how things could have gone better, which adds replay incentive. In some missions, intelligence is faulty, and primary objectives are impossible to complete, so read the debriefing before smashing the replay button. Speaking of buttons, the tab button on your keyboard is most likely going to be worn out after a playthrough, as that provides a boost to your top speed for a brief period of time. This can be useful to close in on enemies or evade incoming missiles. I mostly used it to dash around, and it provides a greater sense of control over the velocity of your craft, and further immersion as the initial blast always shakes your HUD about the place. The campaign stretches out to 29 missions in 3 acts, and 12 further missions in the Silent Threat expansion pack bolster its total to 41. It'll give you a generous, if not unprecedented, amount of bang for your buck, but still pales in comparison to the sheer size of the game it's following in the footsteps of. Therein lies the problem for FreeSpace. TIE Fighter exists, and the Star Wars branded X-Wing Alliance was soon to follow. Volition had to create an IP from scratch rather than using familiar themes that were and continue to be almost universally evocative. Not to mention that the sequel is the game that most fans will talk about. As a result, the first game gets crowded out. The campaign is competent and well presented, but not as good as any of those other titles. Despite this, FreeSpace still ranks as one of the greatest space simulator games in history, because the genre pretty much died with the turn of the millennium. Did I mention the music? It was composed by Dan Wentz, and as you can hear already, it does the job, much like everything else in FreeSpace's general presentation. While it may have been bettered by its sequel and doesn't quite match the overall brilliance of TIE Fighter, it's still an extremely entertaining experience for anyone with a joystick and an itchy trigger finger. With FreeSpace Open existing, there's no question about whether the game holds up on a technical level, and the few shortcomings it does suffer from can be easily dismissed because of the niche genre it operates in. There are few better modding scenes than the FreeSpace one, and the community have lovingly kept this title alive and kicking on modern systems, because there simply hasn't been anything quite like it and its sequel in the 20+ years since. So if you found any of this remotely interesting, I urge you to pick up a copy of its sequel and play the FreeSpace port. And if you had as much fun as I did, then you'll most likely reimburse Volition accordingly by purchasing FreeSpace outright. I hope you remember that tab key to boost away, because you're going to need to when I ask you to get off my lawn!
All right, Jones, how you gonna find that statue and all this junk?
Is that a ship rib in your pocket, or are you just happy to see me?